And so yesterday we stopped by looking at our sine, cosine, and tangent of 30, 45, and 60 degrees. Yes. We kind of built these out by looking at our special triangles, which again, you don't have to have the triangle stuff memorized. However, you do need your sine, cosine, and of each of those. So 30, 45, and 60 degrees. You do have to have those memorized. So if it's helpful, you might write those on the back of the handout, just so you can refer back to them. But again, remember that the whole point of our unit circle is for us to be able to have that information handy. So not just all of our angles, but now we also want to add our sines and our cosines to our unit circle, which is what those little ordered pairs are going to be for. So if I were to draw a point up here, how do I label points?
On a graph.
Yeah. Yeah. And what does that pair consist of? X and Y. Are we all okay with that? That's not maybe. And notice the nice thing about our triangle that we've drawn here is that my distance from the origin over to where that point is, well, that bottom leg would be the same thing as my X, and that right leg would be the same thing as our Y. Agreed? Yes, no, maybe so. Okay. Well, from this angle, remember that this bottom leg is our adjacent. Yes? And because my hypotenuse is always over 1, okay, remember cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. So our cosine just ends up being whatever that bottom leg is. Yes? So when we write our ordered pairs, my cosine can actually go in the X spot. Same thing. My opposite is my sine, and it's also over 1, so it can just go in the Y spot. When we write out these ordered pairs, my cosine is going to come first, and my sine will come second. That throws people off a lot because usually we talk about our trig functions, we always say like sine, cosine, tangent. So we just in our minds want the sine to come first. One way to help you remember it is that like X and Y have to be in alphabetical order. Yes, so do our cosine and our sine. Right. So our goal now is to add all of those ordered pairs around our unit circle. But like I said, or at least I've mentioned a couple times, is really we only have to have our first quadrant memorized. And once we do that, we can fill in the rest of it just from those values. Now, we do have to have our first quadrant memorized. There's not a way around that. And so that's why we went ahead and found the sine and the cosine for all 3 of these yesterday. So remember, our cosine comes first. So what did we write that cosine of 30 degrees is? Agreed. Okay, and then what did we write that our sine of that is?
1/2.
1/2. So that's your first order pair. Then our next one, again, we're writing cosine then sine. Remember, for 45 degrees, both of those were square root of 2 over 2. So then looking at our 60, remember the nice thing about 60 is since it comes from the same triangle of our 30, basically we get the same values. The only difference is because we're looking at the other angle, they get flipped. Are we all okay with that? Then, so those are our first quadrants inside. We also have 2 quadrant angles, meaning the ones on the edges. And those we actually don't have to do any like Trig-y stuff with. Because remember we said that the nice thing about our unit circle is that it has a radius of what? 1. Okay. Well, notice that because this point like lies directly along this radius, right? Like it's gonna have to be 1 unit to the right, which means what's that point gonna have to be? 1, 0. Likewise, at 90 degrees, we are exactly 1 unit up. So what's our point going to be there? 0, 1. And so those still give us our sine and our cosine. So cosine is 1 at 0, and sine is 0. And then cosine is 0 at 90, and sine is 1 at 90. So far, so good. Okay. Now, we still have 3 more quadrants to fill in. And like I said, we don't really want to have to memorize the whole thing. But we are going to use a piece of information that we talked about. So remember, we talked about reference angles. And we talked about how reference angles are going to be helpful. Because when I start drawing triangles, which is what we've been doing, okay, notice that this angle right here is 30 degrees. Yes? And we found our triangle that helped us to find our sine and our cosine. But recall that technically this big angle over here is 150. Yes? So then how much would be left over on the inside to get to 180? 30, yes? So that means that this is also 30. So does that mean that those two triangles are the same triangle? Yeah, I've just reflected it, right? Just turned it to the other side. But just because I've reflected it, that doesn't change any of my values, which means it also doesn't change any of my sines or cosine. So it's going to have the same. Also, remember that we talked about that the little angle that we get by going to the x-axis is called our reference angle. And so we can find our other points by referring back to the reference angle, which is going to have to be one of the ones in our first quadrant. So we said 150 or 5 pi over 6 is going to have the same reference angle as 30 or pi over 6, which means that it's going to have the same cosine and sine. Now, there is one difference. So because I'm moving to the left this time, what does our x value have to be? Negative. So I am going to have to put a negative in front of that first one. So our cosine becomes negative for all of our angles in our second one. And again, remember my 135 would have a reference angle of 45, or our 2 pi over 3 would have a reference angle of pi over 3. So those are going to have the same ordered pairs as our other two. Now, if I move to the left, okay, to pi, right, I'm still moving 1 unit. It's just 1 unit to the left now, so what would that point have to be at? So the point right here.
Move to the 1, 0.
Yep. Same way that if I move down, what would my point at 270 be?
You're next.
Yeah. Now, my other two quadrants, again, those values are just going to keep repeating themselves. Okay. The only difference is which ones are going to be negative in my third quadrant. Both of them, and then which one's going to be negative in our fourth. The second one, or our y value. Yes. Okay. So in your groups, I want you to finish by putting in the last 6 ordered pairs using your reference angles from the first quadrant.